the unstoppable force versus the immovable object. In the mid-1980s, the World Wrestling Federation was a cartoon come to life. It was a world of superheroes, vitamins, and prayers. It was safe, it was sanitized, it was Hulkamania. But in the shadows of the wrestling world, in the smoky arenas of Puerto Rico, the chaotic cages of Texas, and the reverent halls of Japan, there lurked a monster that Hulk Hogan never defeated. Fans dreamed of it. Magazines speculated about it. But inside the corporate offices of Titan Towers, it was the scenario they feared most. Why? Because Bruiser Brody wasn't just a wrestler playing a character. He was an outlaw who refused to follow the script. He was the one man Vince McMahon couldn't control. He was the one man who might have walked into the main event of WrestleMania, looked Hulk Hogan in the eye, and decided, "I'm not losing tonight." Welcome to the WrestleVerse. Today, we aren't just talking about a match that never happened. We are investigating the collision of two worlds. This is the story of the legitimate locker room fights, the backstage politics, and the dangerous intelligence of Frank Goodish. This is the story of why the WWF was terrified of Bruiser Brody. Part 1. The Intelligent Monster, Fact-Checking the Myth. To understand why Brody never worked in the golden era of the WWF, we first have to destroy a myth. Casual fans think Bruiser Brody was crazy, a wild man, a barbarian who didn't understand business. Nothing could be further from the truth. Frank Goodish was arguably the smartest man in the locker room. Before he was a wrestler, he was a sports writer. He understood the power of the press. He understood marketing. And most importantly, he understood leverage. While Hulk Hogan was the ultimate company man, a loyal soldier who did what Vince McMahon asked, Brody was the ultimate independent contractor. He realized very early on that if you sign a contract with one company, they own you, they can lower your pay, they can make you lose, they can kill your all. So, Brody designed a system. He would come into a territory, be it St. Louis, Florida, or Japan. He would destroy everyone, draw huge money for 3 months, and then leave before he had to lose. He protected his character with a level of paranoia that made him a legend. In his mind, Bruiser Brody was a brand, like Coca-Cola. And you don't let Coca-Cola taste bad, not even for one night. This philosophy made him rich. It made him a god in Japan, but it put him on a direct collision course with the way business was done in New York. Part 2. The 1976 experiment, entering the Lion's Den. Many people believe Brody never stepped foot in a McMahon ring. That is false. To understand the bad blood of the 80s, we have to go back to 1976, the era of the WWF, run by Vince McMahon Sr. The landscape was different. The champion wasn't a showman like Hogan. It was the living legend, Bruno Sammartino. New York was a babyface territory. The bad guys came in to feed the hero. You arrive, you look scary for 2 months, and then Bruno beats you, and you leave. It was a factory assembly line. Enter Bruiser Brody. Vince Sr. brought Brody in to challenge Bruno. It was huge business, but immediately there was friction. The WWF style was rigid. You listened to the agents. You listened to the boss. Brody didn't listen to anyone. Reports from the time, corroborated by historians like Dave Meltzer, suggest that Brody hated the New York style. He felt handcuffed. He wanted to brawl, to go into the crowd, to be chaotic. The WWF wanted him to stay in the ring and work a hold. But the real problem wasn't in the ring. It was in the locker room, and it involved a man named Gorilla Monsoon. Part 3. The Sheriff of the Locker Room. Today, we remember Gorilla Monsoon as the lovable commentator who yelled, "Will you stop?" alongside Bobby Heenan. But in the 1970s, Gorilla Monsoon was the sheriff. Monsoon was a legitimate shooter, an amateur wrestler who could cripple 99% of the roster. He was Vince Sr.'s enforcer. His job was to make sure the boys behaved. Brody, being the rebel, started testing the limits. He wasn't selling moves properly. He was being stiff with jobbers. He was acting like Bruiser Brody. There is a legendary story that has been whispered about for decades. The details vary depending on who tells it, but the core is always the same. Brody was acting up. Maybe he wasn't selling enough for Bruno. Maybe he was complaining about pay. Gorilla Monsoon decided to have a chat with him in the locker room. According to the legend, Monsoon confronted Brody. Brody stood up, all 6'8" of him, and Monsoon didn't flinch. In fact, some versions of the story say Monsoon physically cornered Brody, ready to take it to a legitimate fight. And here is the shocking part. Brody backed down. Remember, Frank Goodish was smart. He knew that getting into a shoot fight with Gorilla Monsoon in the middle of Madison Square Garden's locker room was a lose-lose situation. Even if he won, he'd be blackballed forever. If he lost, his aura was destroyed. So, he packed his bags. Brody left the WWF shortly after. He realized that New York was a system of control, and he wasn't built for control. He went back to the territories in Japan, where he could be the king. But this incident planted a seed. The McMahon family remembered, Brody is trouble. And Brody remembered, New York tries to break you. Part 4. The 1980s explosion. Hulkamania rises. Fast forward to 1984. Vince McMahon Jr. buys the company from his father. He begins his ruthless expansion, swallowing up territories like AWA, Mid-South, and WCCW. He needs stars. He steals Roddy Piper. He steals Paul Orndorff. He steals the Junkyard Dog. But there was one name missing from the roster, the biggest free agent in the world. By 1985, Bruiser Brody was earning more money in Japan, working for Giant Baba's All Japan Pro Wrestling than almost anyone in the WWF, except maybe Hogan, and he was doing it working half the schedule. Vince McMahon wanted him. Of course he did. Imagine the poster, Hogan versus Brody at Shea Stadium, the irresistible force versus the immovable object. Negotiations happened. We know they talked, but there were 3 massive roadblocks preventing this dream match. 1, the money. 2, the schedule. 3, and the most dangerous one, the finish. We are about to get into the specific reasons why the Hogan versus Brody match fell apart, including the terrifying reality of what Brody might have done on live TV. If you're enjoying this deep dive into wrestling history, do me a favor, suplex that like button and subscribe to the WrestleVerse. We are documenting the stories that the big companies want you to forget. Now, let's talk about why Hulk Hogan should have been afraid. Very afraid. Part 5. The economics of an outlaw, Japan versus USA. To understand why the Hogan versus Brody match never happened, you have to follow the money. In 1985, the common narrative was that everyone needed to go to the WWF to get rich. But Bruiser Brody had a secret weapon, Giant Baba. Brody was a god in Japan. He wasn't just a wrestler. He was a pop culture icon. He was the intellectual beast. His deal with All Japan Pro Wrestling was legendary. He was making main event money, reportedly up to $14,000 a week in 1980s money, working only a few weeks at a time. He would fly over, stay in first-class hotels, be treated like royalty, destroy everyone, and fly home to Texas to relax with his family. Now, compare that to the WWF schedule. Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, and Roddy Piper were working 300 days a year. They were living in rental cars, driving 400 miles a night between shows in Poughkeepsie and Scranton. Brody looked at that schedule and laughed. Why would he give up his kingdom in Japan to be just another cog in Vince McMahon's machine? He knew that if he signed with the WWF, Vince would demand exclusivity. No more Japan, no more easy money. Brody once told a friend, "Vince wants to own me. Nobody owns me." He was one of the few men in history who could afford to say no to the WWF. Part 6. The Hulkamania problem, the finish. But let's assume for a second that money wasn't an issue. Let's say Vince backed up the Brinks truck and Brody signed. We run into the biggest creative wall in wrestling history, the finish. The WWF formula in the golden era was simple. A monster comes in, beats up everyone for 3 months, looks terrifying, and then he meets Hulk Hogan. Hogan hulks up, points the finger, big boot, leg drop, 1, 2, 3. The monster is slain. The fans go home happy. Bruiser Brody didn't do jobs. He rarely lost clean. In fact, throughout his entire run in the territories, you can count on one hand the number of times Brody was pinned 1, 2, 3 in the middle of the ring without some kind of cheating or disqualification. He protected his aura of invincibility with his life. Brody knew that if he let Hulk Hogan beat him cleanly on Saturday night's main event, his value in Japan would drop. The Japanese magazines would report it. The beast was tamed. So the question becomes, would Vince McMahon change his formula for Brody? Absolutely not. And would Brody lay down for the leg drop? Absolutely not. It was an impasse, an unstoppable force meeting an immovable ego. Part 7. The Smoking Gun, the Lex Luger Incident. If you think Vince McMahon was paranoid for no reason, we have the evidence to prove he was right. Exhibit A, the Lex Luger cage match. In 1987, Brody was working in Florida. He was booked against a young rising star named Lex Luger. Luger was the next big thing. Handsome, muscular, the future. Basically, a prototype for what WWF wanted. The plan was simple. They have a match. Luger shines. Brody makes him look good. But something happened. The bell rang, and Brody stopped working. He just stood there. Luger would try to lock up, and Brody would brush him off. Luger threw a punch, and Brody didn't sell it. He just stared at him. It is one of the most uncomfortable moments in wrestling history. Luger, who was green and inexperienced, panicked. He didn't know what to do. Was this real? Was Brody going to hurt him? Brody was testing him, or maybe he was bored. Or maybe he just wanted to show everyone who was really in charge. Eventually, the match fell apart. It was a disaster. Word of this incident spread like wildfire. Every promoter in the country heard about it. Vince McMahon saw this and realized, if he does this to Lex Luger in Florida, what happens if he does this to Hulk Hogan on live pay-per-view? Imagine WrestleMania. Millions watching, Hogan goes for the big boot, and Brody just doesn't move. He stands there, arms crossed, destroying the entire illusion of the WWF in seconds. That was a risk Vince McMahon could never, ever take. Part 8. The negotiations that died. Despite the risks, rumors persist that in the mid-80s, one final attempt was made. Barbara Goodish, Brody's widow, has stated in interviews that they were close to a deal at one point. The idea was a short run. Brody comes in, works a program with Hogan, and leaves. But the deal breaker was always control. Brody wanted creative control in his contract. He wanted the power to say no to a finish he didn't like. Vince McMahon gave that power to one man, Hulk Hogan. He wasn't going to give it to the outlaw who fought Gorilla Monsoon in a locker room 10 years prior. Brody was a square peg in a round hole. The WWF was becoming sports entertainment, plastic, polished, and predictable. Brody was pro wrestling, gritty, violent, and real. As the 80s rolled on, the window closed. The WWF got bigger, safer, and more corporate. Brody stayed in the wild, the king of the Indies, the emperor of Japan. He didn't need the WWF, and frankly, the WWF was too scared to handle him. But tragically, this independence would lead him to a locker room in Puerto Rico in 1988. a locker room where there were no cameras and no Gorilla Monsoon to keep the peace. Part 9. The Tragic Cost of Freedom. Puerto Rico, 1988. By 1988, the door to the WWF was likely closed forever. Brody was 42 years old. He was wealthy, famous, and free. But freedom has a price. Because Brody wasn't in the safety of Vince McMahon's corporate bubble, he was still traveling to the Wild West territories to earn his keep. And the wildest of them all was Puerto Rico. If New York was Disneyland, Puerto Rico was the Thunderdome. It was passionate, violent, and ran by old-school rules. On July 16, 1988, Brody was in the locker room before a match. He wasn't surrounded by corporate security or HR representatives. He was surrounded by the sharks of the industry. We won't go into the gruesome details of the murder. That is a story for another time. But the facts are these. Jose Gonzalez, a wrestler and booker who had clashed with Brody over business and power, asked him to step into the shower area to talk. Minutes later, screams were heard. Frank Goodish lay bleeding from stab wounds. He died later that night because the ambulance was too slow and the hospital was unprepared. And here lies the tragic irony of the Bruiser Brody story. The very thing that made him a legend, his refusal to bow down to corporate control, is exactly what put him in that locker room that night. If he had signed with Vince McMahon, if he had swallowed his pride, taken the leg drop, and become a cartoon character, he would have been in a 5-star hotel in the United States that night. He would have been safe. He chose freedom. And it cost him his life. Part 10. The Legacy, the Shadow over the WWF. Brody died, but his ghost haunted the WWF for decades. You see, Vince McMahon may have won the war of the 80s, but Brody's style won the war of influence. Mick Foley, arguably one of the biggest stars of the 90s, modeled his entire Cactus Jack persona on Bruiser Brody. The wild hair, the fluffy boots, the chaotic brawling style. The Undertaker, he took the invincible monster aura that Brody perfected and refined it for TV. Even in modern times, the late Brody Lee named himself after the Bruiser. The outlaw style became cool. The anti-hero became the archetype of the Attitude Era. In a strange way, the WWF spent the next 20 years trying to recreate Bruiser Brody, because they could never have the real thing. So, looking back at the dream match that scared the WWF, we have to ask, who won? Did Vince McMahon win by keeping his product safe and creating a billion-dollar empire without Brody? Or did Bruiser Brody win by never selling his soul? I believe that the match never happening was the best possible outcome. If they had fought, it would have been a mess. A 5-minute disqualification, a political nightmare, a bad match that would have disappointed us all. By never clashing, the myth remains perfect. In our minds, Brody is still the one man Hogan couldn't beat. He is the eternal what if. The monster lurking in the shadows that the superhero was too afraid to fight. Frank Goodish refused to be just another victim of the leg drop. He lived on his own terms, and he died on his own terms. In the scripted world of professional wrestling, that is the only victory that is truly real. What do you think? If Brody and Hogan had met in 1986 at WrestleMania 2, what would have happened? Would Brody have shot on Hogan? Would Vince have fired him live on air? Let me know your theory in the comments below. And if you want to know more about the dark side of the Golden Era, check out our video on the Von Erich fraud that changed wrestling forever. Right here. This is the WrestleVerse, and remember, history is written by the survivors, but legends never die.